I never imagined that the night I thought would be magical would become the darkest moment of my life. A night where the person I trusted most, my own sister, would betray me in the cruelest way, and my family would dismiss it as something I needed to move on from. The betrayal didn't just shake me emotionally, it almost destroyed me physically. The emergency room didn't let anyone ignore the truth, and what happened there would change everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and survival. That night began as any high school senior prom should. Excitement, anticipation, laughter, and the glow of young dreams. But it ended with shock, fear, and a harsh confrontation with the unexpected, unbearable reality that sometimes those closest to you can be the ones who hurt you most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The night of prom had been a whirlwind of excitement for me, Emily Carter, a quiet, studious girl who usually stayed in the background but had been secretly looking forward to this night for months. Our town of Brookside, a small suburban community where everyone knew everyone, had spent weeks preparing for prom, with the gymnasium transformed into a sparkling wonderland of gold and navy decorations, shimmering fairy lights, and a live band blasting the latest hits. I had spent hours getting ready in my bedroom, my best friend Mia helping me with my hair and makeup, while our favorite playlists provided the soundtrack to our laughter and anticipation. I had chosen a flowing sapphire dress that made me feel both elegant and confident, the way I imagined I would at the most important night of my high school life. My sister Hannah, 3 years older and always the center of attention, had offered to help me get ready too. At first, I felt thrilled to have her guidance, but there had always been a subtle undercurrent of tension between us. Hannah was beautiful, charismatic, and effortlessly popular, while I was more reserved, often overlooked, and the target of her occasional sarcastic comments. Still, I wanted to believe she had my best interests at heart, so I ignored the little warning bells in my head. When we arrived at the venue, the gymnasium was packed with excited students, parents, and chaperones, everyone immersed in the celebratory atmosphere. Laughter and music filled the air, the scent of perfume and formal wear mingling with the faint smell of popcorn and punch from the refreshment table. I was nervous but thrilled, mingling with classmates I had known for years and reveling in the freedom that prom promised. Hannah stayed close, smiling and chatting with me at first, taking pictures and helping me navigate the crowded room. I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong, not when she seemed so attentive and encouraging. Then, in the middle of the night, I felt a pang of exhaustion and decided to take a break, heading toward the refreshment table to grab a drink. That was when she offered me a glass of punch. It seemed innocent enough, her smile warm and sisterly, the kind of gesture that would be unremarkable if not for what happened next. I had no way of knowing that this small, seemingly harmless act would set in motion a nightmare that I could not escape without confronting truths I never wanted to face. The first sip tasted sweet, refreshing, and comforting, a brief reprieve from the dizzying swirl of music and lights. But within minutes, a strange dizziness washed over me, like stepping onto a moving carousel that spun faster than my body could comprehend. My heart began to race, my vision blurred, and an overwhelming sense of nausea gripped me. I tried to study myself, thinking perhaps I had just eaten too much or been standing too long, but the feeling intensified and the room seemed to tilt wildly. I called out to Hannah, hoping she would support me, but she smiled and waved me off, insisting I was just tired and needed to sit down. Panic began to rise in my chest as my body betrayed me, and I stumbled toward a nearby table, trying to stay upright, trying to make sense of the sudden, frightening weakness. It was then that a teacher noticed my distress and rushed over, concern etched across their face as they helped me sit down. I could barely form words, my lips trembling, my body trembling, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. I wanted to tell someone what had happened, but even as I opened my mouth, my words slurred and my thoughts scrambled. All I could do was hope someone would understand that something was seriously wrong. As paramedics arrived and transported me to the emergency room, the severity of the situation began to crystallize. Tests revealed substances in my system that should not have been there, and the medical team acted quickly to stabilize me. I felt a crushing combination of fear, betrayal, and disbelief. How could my own sister, someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally, have done this? When I tried to tell my parents what had happened, hoping for support and protection, I was met with dismissive glances and half-hearted reassurances. It's probably nothing. Just move on. Prom is over. Their words stung far worse than any physical pain. The weight of betrayal settled over me, a cold, suffocating blanket that seemed impossible to shake.
Yet, the hospital staff treated me with the seriousness and urgency that my family could not, their insistence on truth and careful observation becoming the lifeline that would pull me through the night and set the stage for the fight that was still to come. In that moment, lying in a hospital bed, hooked to monitors, and surrounded by strangers who took my fear seriously, I realized that the path forward would not be simple, that speaking the truth and demanding justice would require courage I had never had to summon before. It was the first step in a journey that would test every relationship, every belief, and every ounce of strength I had within me. The hours that followed in the hospital blurred together into a confusing mix of monitors, nurses, and an endless stream of questions I barely had the energy to answer. Every beep and click of the medical equipment reminded me of how fragile my body had become in such a short span of time, and the fear of what might have happened if I hadn't been discovered in time gnawed relentlessly at my mind. I was terrified not only by the physical effects of whatever substance had been slipped into my drink, but by the enormity of the betrayal itself. How had my sister, Hannah, whose presence had once felt like safety, become the source of this unimaginable violation? Every memory of our childhood together, the small moments where she had seemed protective and kind, now twisted in my mind, turning warm nostalgia into a bitter reminder of trust broken. As the nurses took my vitals repeatedly, I felt trapped between my own fear and the incredulity of the situation. My body weakened by the drugs, my family refusing to acknowledge the reality, and yet the medical staff treating every symptom with urgent seriousness, showing me a clarity of concern that my own home could not provide. Doctors spoke in measured tones, explaining that my condition had been dangerous, but that with immediate treatment, they were confident I would recover physically. However, even as my body stabilized, the emotional turmoil only deepened. The idea that my sister had deliberately harmed me became more concrete with each passing moment. My parents' insistence that I simply move on hit me harder than the drugs ever could. It wasn't just denial, it was a dismissal of my suffering, a refusal to recognize the profound violation that had occurred. The hospital became my refuge, a place where the truth mattered more than appearances or convenient family narratives. Each nurse, each doctor who spoke directly and firmly with me validated my experience in a way my own home could not provide. In that sterile, impersonal environment, I discovered a strange sense of empowerment. The truth, which my family seemed determined to bury, had allies here who refused to let me be ignored. It was as if the stark, fluorescent-lit corridors themselves demanded acknowledgement of what had happened, insisting that justice and clarity could not be sidestepped. During the long night, I began to piece together what had happened, each fragment of memory sharpening into a clearer understanding. I remembered the punch at prom, the way Hannah had insisted I take the glass, her voice unusually insistent though wrapped in a cheerful tone. At the time, I had brushed it off as typical sibling insistence, never imagining that beneath it lay deliberate malice. My memory of the first signs of illness, the dizzying vertigo, the nausea, and the panic in my chest all now fit into a pattern that left little room for coincidence. The realization hit me with a mixture of horror and clarity. This was not an accident, not carelessness, but a conscious act intended to harm me. And yet, despite this clarity, I faced the crushing isolation of knowing that those closest to me, my parents, the people who should have been my immediate protectors, were unwilling to confront this truth. Their insistence that I let it go, that I move on and not make a fuss, felt like a betrayal layered atop betrayal. It was a painful paradox. I had survived a physical assault, but now I was facing the emotional assault of being dismissed by those who should have mattered most. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the morning light seeped through the hospital windows, I realized that recovery was not going to be as simple as the medical staff suggested. Physically, I was improving, but emotionally, I was navigating a minefield. Questions swirled relentlessly in my mind. Why had Hannah done this? What had motivated her to choose such a cruel method to assert control or satisfy whatever personal vendetta had driven her? Was this a one-time lapse of judgment? Or had there been a simmering resentment I never noticed? Each question intensified the gnawing anxiety that my family's dismissal only compounded. In their eyes, my experience was an inconvenient disruption to their sense of normalcy, a problem to be glossed over rather than confronted. The hospital, however, offered an unexpected contrast. Here, my story was met with seriousness, with procedures designed to capture evidence, assess the risk, and document what had happened. For the first time since that night, I felt a glimmer of hope that the truth could not be erased, that my voice and experience mattered, even if my family refused to acknowledge them. I began to work with the hospital staff, answering questions about my symptoms, the timeline of events, and the interactions I had with Hannah that evening. Each response was painstaking, the act of recounting the trauma physically draining, yet strangely cathartic. With every detail I provided, the story of that night became more solid, less dependent on my memory alone, and more grounded in the objective observations of the medical professionals who had treated me. The process also revealed a new dimension of fear. The idea that confronting my sister about her actions might provoke retaliation or further harm. I realized that speaking out would require careful consideration, strategy, and courage. The hospital, with its impartial authority and procedural rigor, gave me a sense of structure in the chaos, a roadmap for navigating a situation that my family had rendered morally and emotionally opaque. In the sterile, buzzing halls of the ER, the nebulous threat of betrayal was transformed into something tangible, a documented assault, a recorded crime that could not be easily dismissed. Even as I absorbed the gravity of my situation, the hospital staff became my unexpected allies, encouraging me to trust my instincts and to understand that my experience was valid. They explained the importance of documenting every symptom, every memory, every suspicion, not just for immediate medical care, but for potential legal and protective measures. In those long, quiet hours, surrounded by the hum of machines and the steady footfalls of nurses, I felt the first stirrings of determination. My body might have been weak, but my resolve was strengthening. If my family refused to act, I would find other channels, other forms of support that would ensure the truth was heard and that the consequences for my sister's actions could not be ignored. This was the beginning of a new awareness, that survival was not just about enduring the physical effects of that night, but also about asserting the moral and emotional truth that had been stolen from me. The hospital had become not just a place of healing, but a crucible of clarity, forging a path toward the confrontation that would eventually come.
The following days were a disorienting mixture of medical appointments, whispered questions from concerned staff, and the growing realization that my life had changed irreversibly in a single horrifying evening. At home, the tension was almost unbearable. My parents carried on as if nothing had happened, glancing at me with polite concern, but quickly redirecting the conversation whenever the events of prom surfaced. Their insistence that I move on felt like a weight pressing down on me, a constant reminder that I was alone in my fight to process what had occurred. Each attempt to discuss the situation with them was met with vague reassurances or gentle admonishments, framing my distress as overreaction, a problem of perception rather than reality. It was a surreal inversion. The person who had committed the act of betrayal, my sister, was largely untouched by accountability, while I, the victim, was expected to quietly suppress the trauma and resume normal life. That stark imbalance ignited a mixture of frustration, fear, and an emerging determination that I could not and would not ignore. Despite my parents' dismissal, I felt an undeniable shift in my own perspective. The clarity that had begun to form in the hospital strengthened as I revisited the events of that night in my mind. Small details, once easy to overlook, now demanded attention. Hannah's subtle smirk when she handed me the drink, the way she appeared almost too eager to offer assistance, the fleeting look she gave when my symptoms first emerged. At first, I had brushed these off as ordinary sibling behavior or imagined slights. But in the wake of the emergency room experience, they became pieces of a larger, undeniable pattern. I realized that what had happened was not a momentary lapse in judgment or careless mistake, but a deliberate act that carried severe consequences. My sense of betrayal deepened, no longer tempered by confusion or uncertainty. It was a precise, intentional violation, and yet the silence of my family suggested that the truth was something they were unwilling or perhaps too afraid to confront. That silence became a catalyst for my resolve. If they would not acknowledge it, I would take matters into my own hands. To regain a sense of control, I began documenting everything. Every memory of prom, every interaction with Hannah leading up to that night, every symptom I had experienced was meticulously recorded in a notebook I kept safely tucked under my bed. The act of writing became both a coping mechanism and a tool for evidence. I detailed the moment she handed me the drink, the subsequent dizziness, nausea, and disorientation, the minutes before the teacher intervened, and the chaotic trip to the hospital. Each detail sharpened the narrative in my mind, giving shape to what had initially felt like a fragmented nightmare. I even began noting the ways my parents responded, cataloging their dismissals, their subtle attempts to normalize the event, and their insistence that I move on as though my suffering were a minor inconvenience. This painstaking process realized that the act of documenting my experience was a form of reclamation. By asserting my version of events in a tangible, written form, I reclaimed a measure of agency that had been stripped from me on that night.
While I focused on establishing a clear record of the events, I also began to notice a profound shift in how others perceived me. Friends who had attended prom began asking questions, offering quiet concern, and some even confiding that they had noticed Hannah's unusual behavior but had been unsure of how to respond. Each conversation, however brief, reinforced the reality that the experience I had endured was not imagined. There were witnesses, subtle though they might have been, who could corroborate aspects of the story, further solidifying the evidence I was gathering. These moments of external validation became a lifeline, counteracting the isolation imposed by my family's denial. I slowly understood that while I had been physically weakened and emotionally shaken, there were pathways to support and accountability beyond the immediate circle of family. And that realization offered a fragile but vital sense of hope. Despite the growing clarity and support from friends and medical professionals, confronting the truth within myself was perhaps the most difficult part.
I wrestled with a mixture of anger, fear, and grief, all intertwined in a complex emotional knot. The anger at my sister, at her deliberate violation of trust, burned alongside the fear of further betrayal or retaliation. Grief over the loss of the safe, trusting relationship I once had with her weighed heavily on my heart. Each day brought waves of these conflicting emotions, sometimes washing over me unexpectedly, sometimes simmering quietly beneath the surface. It was exhausting, but I began to recognize that navigating these emotions was a necessary part of preparing for the next phase, confronting the person responsible and ensuring that the truth could no longer be ignored or silenced. Emotional resilience, I realized, was just as crucial as physical recovery. In this period of reflection, I also began to appreciate the extraordinary role that the emergency room staff had played in stabilizing not only my physical condition, but also my belief in objective truth. Their insistence on thorough testing, careful observation, and clear documentation highlighted a stark contrast with the attitude of my family. It was as if the hospital itself had become an external validation of the reality I faced. What happened to me was serious, deliberate, and unacceptable. That validation strengthened my resolve to act, to ensure that the betrayal I had endured would not remain hidden or dismissed. The hospital had given me the tools and evidence I needed, and now it was up to me to take the next steps toward exposing the truth, seeking accountability, and reclaiming the agency that had been stripped from me on that fateful night. With this realization, I felt the first stirrings of courage, a determination that would become the foundation of the fight still to come, a fight that would test every relationship, every assumption, and every ounce of strength I had to offer. As the days stretched into a week, I began to confront a truth I had tried to avoid. My sister's actions were deliberate, and my family's refusal to acknowledge the severity of what had happened left me with no choice but to rely on external authority to validate my experience. The emergency room had provided the initial proof of wrongdoing, but it was only the beginning of a longer, more painstaking journey toward accountability. I realized that if justice was to be sought, I had to take proactive steps. I started by gathering the scattered threads of evidence from the hospital, toxicology reports, nurse notes, and observations that detailed my sudden illness. Each document, each line of clinical description became a tangible representation of the truth, a concrete counterweight to the dismissals and minimizations offered by my parents. Holding these reports in my hands, I felt a mix of fear and determination. The fear stemmed from the realization that this path would force me into confrontation, not only with my sister, but with my family, who might continue to resist acknowledging reality. But the determination surged stronger than any anxiety, fueled by the undeniable proof in front of me and the knowledge that I had survived what could have been a far worse outcome. I knew that the next step had to involve an objective, authoritative third party who could navigate the situation without the biases and emotional entanglements that had paralyzed my family. I sought the guidance of a local victim advocacy center, an organization that specialized in helping young people affected by assault and betrayal. When I walked into their office clutching the neatly organized stack of hospital documentation, I felt a combination of trepidation and relief. For the first time, I encountered professionals who didn't question my experience, who didn't ask me to move on or minimize what had occurred. They asked questions carefully and compassionately, taking notes, verifying timelines, and providing a roadmap for the legal and protective steps that might follow. The process was meticulous, demanding not just accuracy, but courage to recount moments that still made me shiver with shame and fear. Even though recounting the events in detail was emotionally taxing, it reinforced my growing awareness that the truth, once documented and supported, could not be ignored or erased, and it became the backbone of my growing sense of agency. During this process, I began reflecting on the dynamics that had enabled Hannah to act without immediate consequence. My sister had always thrived in a world where charm and appearance often overshadowed accountability. She was a master at deflection, capable of presenting a facade of concern or amusement that masked deeper resentments or ambitions.
I realized that the power dynamics in our family had subtly reinforced her behavior. The unspoken hierarchy where older siblings often dominated, parents hesitated to confront unpleasant truths, and the younger sibling's perspective was treated as malleable or subordinate. This recognition stung deeply, illuminating how the betrayal was not an isolated event, but a symptom of a broader pattern of family dynamics that left me vulnerable. It also clarified why my parents' insistence on moving past the incident had felt so suffocating. They were not dismissing me because they were cruel, but because they had been conditioned to avoid confrontation, to maintain a fragile sense of harmony, even at the expense of truth and justice. Understanding this gave me insight into the obstacles I faced, but it also steeled my resolve. I could not rely on those dynamics to protect me. I had to assert my own agency and demand that the truth be recognized. While preparing for possible legal steps, I also began considering the social dimension of the situation. Prom had been a public event, and though most attendees were unaware of the specifics, there were whispers, subtle observations, and patterns of behavior that could corroborate my account. I discreetly reached out to friends who had been present that night, seeking their perspective, not to sensationalize the story, but to reinforce the objective truth. Some friends were hesitant to speak openly, fearing family drama or confrontation, while others were eager to support me quietly, confirming moments they had witnessed that aligned with my account. Each corroborating detail reinforced the reality that what had occurred was neither imagined nor trivial. It was deliberate, harmful, and undeniable. These interactions, though carefully managed to avoid escalating conflict, became a foundation for rebuilding confidence and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I began to understand that truth, once supported by documentation and witness accounts, could not be silenced, even when immediate family refused to acknowledge it. That realization became a driving force behind every action I took in the following days. At the same time, I was forced to navigate the difficult terrain of emotional recovery. Though the hospital had stabilized my physical condition, the psychological trauma was far more complex. I experienced bouts of anxiety, recurring visions of the night, and a pervasive sense of mistrust. Every interaction with Hannah, every shared space in our home became a minefield, prompting hyper-awareness and guarded behavior. I also felt a complicated mix of love, anger, and disbelief toward my sister. Memories of our shared childhood, moments where she had seemed protective or kind, now collided with the horrifying reality of her betrayal. This emotional dissonance was draining, but I began to channel it into deliberate, focused energy. Journaling, consulting with advocates, and organizing documentation became coping mechanisms, giving structure and purpose to the chaos. The act of preparing for accountability became a therapeutic tool, transforming fear and confusion into deliberate action. Slowly, I realized that this was not just about confronting a single act of betrayal, but about reclaiming my voice, my agency, and my right to demand that the truth be recognized. By the end of the week, I felt a tentative sense of empowerment beginning to replace the paralyzing fear of earlier days. While I could not yet predict how my family would react, nor could I foresee every obstacle that lay ahead, I understood that I was no longer passive in the face of betrayal. I had objective proof, a network of supportive professionals, and the clarity of my own experience to guide me. The path forward would be difficult, emotionally taxing, and fraught with confrontation, but the groundwork had been laid for the next steps.
the crucial moments when the truth would be confronted head-on, when silence and denial would no longer protect the person responsible. That realization, faint but unmistakable, marked the beginning of a turning point, the first step towards ensuring that the injustice I had endured would not remain hidden or ignored, and that the consequences of betrayal would be addressed, regardless of familial reluctance or societal discomfort. The days following my initial consultations with the Victim Advocacy Center marked a critical phase in the process that would eventually bring the truth to light. While my body had mostly recovered, the emotional and strategic work was just beginning, and I had to carefully balance the tension between exposing the betrayal and protecting myself from further harm. I spent hours reviewing the hospital records, noting every irregularity, every symptom timeline, and every observation made by the medical staff that highlighted the sudden and unnatural onset of my condition. Each document confirmed what I had already known intuitively, that my sister's actions were not only deliberate, but premeditated. It was a chilling realization, the recognition that someone so close could plan and execute a violation so calculated. But it also reinforced my determination to pursue accountability. The physical evidence, combined with my carefully maintained journal entries and corroborating witness statements from friends, formed a solid foundation upon which I could build my case. This process of meticulous organization became a shield and a weapon, providing me with the clarity and confidence that my story was valid and undeniable.
This step required a level of vigilance that was exhausting, as even mundane family encounters carried the potential for further emotional harm or manipulation. My parents, steadfast in their insistence that I move on, often seemed oblivious to the intensity of my internal struggle, yet their dismissive attitude only reinforced my need to pursue external validation. I realized that the battle for truth was not just against my sister, but also against a culture of silence and avoidance that had allowed the violation to go unchallenged. This understanding strengthened my resolve, transforming fear and uncertainty into purposeful, strategic action. As I prepared for the eventual confrontation, I also began to rebuild a support network beyond the confines of my family. Friends who had noticed my distress at prom, even if they had been hesitant to intervene at the time, became crucial allies. I reached out cautiously, explaining what had happened and sharing the documentation I had accumulated. Many were shocked, expressing disbelief and anger at Hannah's actions, while others offered quiet reassurance and practical support. Their responses validated my experience in a way my family had not, reinforcing the reality that I was not imagining the betrayal and that seeking justice was not only justified but necessary. This external support was transformative, providing both emotional sustenance and practical assistance as I navigated the next steps. It became increasingly clear that the truth, once corroborated by witnesses and documented evidence, had the power to cut through denial and avoidance, creating a foundation upon which accountability could be demanded. During this period, I also began to confront the difficult emotional terrain of preparing to speak publicly about what had happened. The prospect of addressing Hannah directly, of exposing the betrayal to my family and possibly to the authorities, was both terrifying and empowering. Fear of retaliation or further manipulation loomed large, but the clarity provided by the hospital records and the advocacy guidance helped me frame the confrontation as a necessary and deliberate act rather than an impulsive reaction. I spent hours rehearsing what I would say, imagining different scenarios, and preparing for the various ways my sister and family might respond. This mental preparation was exhausting yet critical, allowing me to maintain control of my emotions and ensure that my voice, when finally heard, would be confident, coherent, and anchored in undeniable truth. I understood that the confrontation was not just a personal reckoning, but a strategic step toward justice, one that would require every ounce of patience, precision, and courage I could muster. As the confrontation drew closer, I also faced the growing tension of anticipating my sister's reaction.
Hannah had always been capable of manipulation, charm, and deflection, traits that had allowed her to navigate family dynamics with ease and often avoid accountability. I anticipated that she might deny, minimize, or even reverse the narrative to paint herself as innocent or misunderstood. This anticipation heightened my vigilance, compelling me to prepare counterpoints supported by documented evidence and witness accounts. The act of mentally strategizing for these possibilities became an exercise in resilience, forcing me to confront not only the external challenge of proving the betrayal, but also the internal challenge of remaining emotionally grounded. Every memory, every recorded detail, every corroborating testimony became a tool, a shield against potential distortion, and a means of asserting control over a situation that had initially left me feeling powerless and violated. In this way, the process of preparation transformed fear into agency, enabling me to move forward with a sense of purpose that had been absent in the immediate aftermath of prom. Amid the strategic planning, I also had to contend with the isolation imposed by my parents' refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. Their insistence that I move on created a sense of alienation that made it difficult to rely on them for emotional support. Each dismissive remark or attempt to normalize the event reinforced the necessity of external validation and strategic preparation. The absence of family support, while painful, became a catalyst for self-reliance and resourcefulness. I realized that accountability would not come from those who preferred denial, but from my own efforts to document, corroborate, and present the truth in a way that could not be ignored. This understanding strengthened my resolve and clarified the stakes. Exposing the betrayal was not simply a matter of personal vindication, but a necessary step to prevent further harm and ensure that the violation was recognized for the seriousness it deserved. In the quiet moments of reflection, I felt a growing sense of determination and readiness, the first true signs that I was preparing to take the fight beyond private anguish and into the realm of undeniable truth. The moment that shifted everything from private suffering to undeniable reality arrived during the first meeting with the detective assigned to review my case. For weeks, I had meticulously gathered every piece of evidence, the hospital records, the nurse observations, my journal recounting each detail, and the statements from friends who had noticed Hannah's strange behavior at prom. As I handed over the neatly organized stack of documents, I felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. This was the first time that a neutral, authoritative figure would assess the situation without preconceived notions, without familial bias, and without the easy dismissal that had frustrated me at home. The detective listened carefully as I recounted the events, taking notes and asking precise, methodical questions about timing, interactions, and my physical and emotional responses. Each answer, each piece of corroboration seemed to solidify the case, transforming what felt like an isolated traumatic incident into a documented, verifiable act of betrayal that could no longer be denied or minimized.
It was during this review that undeniable proof began to emerge, a clarity so stark that it forced the situation out of the realm of conjecture and into the realm of incontrovertible fact. The toxicology reports from the hospital showed substances in my system that should not have been present, compounds with no medical justification, and a rapid onset of harmful effects. Paired with the meticulous notes from the nurses who had observed the sudden change in my behavior, it became impossible to argue that the incident was accidental or misinterpreted. Even small details, like the timing of my symptoms relative to when I had been handed the punch, formed a pattern that painted a clear and chilling picture. Each layer of evidence reinforced the other, creating a chain of accountability that pointed directly to Hannah. The sense of vindication, mixed with the lingering shock of the betrayal itself, was overwhelming. For the first time, the reality of what had happened was anchored in more than memory or emotion. It existed in cold, objective documentation that could withstand scrutiny, challenge denial, and demand justice. While the detective meticulously reviewed the evidence, I felt the emotional weight of the moment settle over me. This was no longer just a personal confrontation or a family dispute. It had become a matter of formal investigation, a situation in which truth, rather than convenience or avoidance, held the power. The weight of the betrayal, which had pressed on me silently for weeks, began to shift, replaced by a sense of agency.
I understood that the deliberate act, the careful planning behind the poisoning of my drink, was no longer something my sister could hide behind charm, innocence, or family loyalty. The evidence was concrete, undeniable, and immutable. It was a turning point in the story I had been living, a moment where the truth could no longer be silenced, no matter the resistance from those who had previously refused to acknowledge it. The detectives' professional focus, their commitment to objective assessment, served as a stark contrast to the dismissive attitudes I had encountered at home, and served as a powerful reminder that truth could prevail when properly documented and supported. During the subsequent days, the investigation intensified, and the implications of the evidence became clearer. Each conversation with the detective revealed the seriousness of the situation, the potential consequences, and the ways in which the documented facts would be assessed in a formal context. It was a sobering realization. The betrayal was not simply an emotional wound to be ignored or minimized, but a criminal act with tangible repercussions. As this understanding settled over me, I began to process the magnitude of the transformation in my life. The story that had begun with a night of excitement and anticipation had evolved into a complex narrative of betrayal, survival, and emerging justice. The undeniable proof, the chain of medical documentation, and the corroborating witness accounts provided a foundation that no familial insistence on moving on could overturn. In that moment, I recognized the power of objective truth to counteract deception and denial, to shine a light on wrongdoing that had previously been hidden in the shadows of privilege, charm, and silence. Equally significant was the realization of the personal transformation I was undergoing. The weeks of fear, uncertainty, and careful documentation had honed a sense of resilience and strategic thinking I had never known I possessed. Each meeting with authorities, each conversation with advocates, reinforced my confidence and my ability to assert control over a situation that had initially felt completely overwhelming. The clarity provided by undeniable proof allowed me to detach from the immediate emotional chaos of betrayal and approach the unfolding events with focus and determination. While anger, grief, and disbelief still simmered beneath the surface, they were tempered by a growing sense of purpose to ensure that the truth was recognized, that accountability was demanded, and that no one could dismiss the violation I had endured simply because it was uncomfortable or inconvenient. This was the moment when fear began to transform into empowerment, the turning point where the path toward justice became tangible, actionable, and real. As the investigation progressed, I also had to navigate the delicate social dynamics that had always surrounded my sister. Hannah, previously untouchable in the eyes of our family and social circle, could no longer rely on her charm, popularity, or ability to deflect scrutiny. The combination of objective proof and careful documentation created an environment in which her actions were transparent and accountable. This shift began to alter the atmosphere at home, even if subtly. While my parents still struggled with denial and avoidance, I noticed a change in Hannah's behavior, subtle hesitations, nervous glances, and moments of defensiveness that had never been part of her usual confident demeanor. The undeniable proof had created a crack in the facade that she had maintained, signaling that the consequences of her actions could no longer be ignored or circumvented. Witnessing this shift reinforced the power of truth, the importance of documentation, and the necessity of deliberate, evidence-based action in confronting betrayal that had once seemed untouchable. With the undeniable proof now firmly in place, I faced the most difficult decision of all: whether to confront my sister directly and ensure the truth was known, or to allow the investigation to proceed without my active participation. For weeks I had wrestled with fear, anger, and grief. But as the evidence crystallized into a clear narrative, I recognized that inaction was no longer an option.
This was the point of no return, the moment where I had to stop protecting those who had harmed me and demand recognition for the violation I had endured. The decision to speak was not taken lightly. It carried the weight of potential escalation, family rupture, and emotional fallout. Yet, it was necessary. The truth could no longer remain silent, hidden beneath the veil of familial loyalty or avoidance. My agency, strengthened by the meticulous documentation and the unwavering support of the victim advocacy team, compelled me to act.
To remain silent would be to allow the betrayal to go unchallenged and to reinforce the message that deliberate harm could be dismissed simply because it originated within the family. I resolved that I would no longer be silenced, that my voice mattered, and that accountability would be demanded. When I finally arranged to meet with Hannah, the tension was almost unbearable. Every instinct urged caution, every memory of betrayal stoked anger, yet I approached the encounter with careful preparation. I had rehearsed, in my mind, exactly how I would present the facts, the evidence, and the unshakable truth of my experience. My goal was not revenge, nor an emotional outburst, but clear, precise communication that could not be denied or deflected. As I entered the room, I felt the weight of weeks of fear, doubt, and uncertainty pressing down, yet beneath it, a strong current of determination carried me forward. This confrontation was the culmination of everything that had preceded it. The medical documentation, the witness accounts, the advocacy guidance, all converging to ensure that the betrayal would no longer be hidden. The room itself seemed charged with tension, the air thick with the unsaid, the anticipation of accountability, and the gravity of truths long suppressed. As I spoke, I laid out the evidence meticulously, step by step, leaving no detail vague or open to interpretation. I recounted the events of prom, the precise timing of the drink, the immediate physical effects, and the subsequent hospitalization. I presented the toxicology reports, the nurse's observations, and the corroborating statements from friends who had witnessed Hannah's unusual behavior. Each piece of evidence was delivered calmly, logically, and with the firm understanding that these facts were unassailable. I could see Hannah's composure begin to crack, the subtle defenses and habitual charm failing under the weight of undeniable proof. The confrontation was both painful and empowering. It forced me to relive the trauma while simultaneously asserting my control over the narrative. In that moment, I was no longer a passive victim, but an active participant in establishing the truth, ensuring that deception could no longer shield her from accountability. The deliberate act of speaking the truth, supported by objective evidence, became a transformative exercise in courage, resilience, and moral clarity. The confrontation also exposed the fragile loyalties within our family. As I presented the evidence, it became clear which members were willing to acknowledge reality and which were still clinging to denial. My parents, initially resistant, found themselves confronted not only with objective proof, but also with the clarity of my conviction. The room became a crucible in which the consequences of avoidance and denial were made impossible to sustain. Allies within our extended network, friends, advocates, and the authorities involved stood as witnesses to the truth, reinforcing the legitimacy of my claims and the necessity of accountability. It was a defining moment where loyalties were tested, relationships strained, and the long simmering tension between truth and avoidance reached a breaking point. For the first time, the betrayal could no longer be obscured, and the moral landscape of the family was laid bare for all to see. While the immediate emotional toll of this confrontation was immense, it was balanced by the profound sense of empowerment that arose from asserting my truth. Every word spoken, every piece of evidence presented reinforced the reality that the violation I had endured was deliberate, serious, and inexcusable. I could see the impact on Hannah, her previous confidence diminished, her habitual manipulations ineffective, and it became clear that the careful, strategic approach I had prepared was working. The confrontation was not only about holding her accountable, but also about reclaiming my agency, asserting my voice, and ensuring that no further minimization or denial could take place. In speaking the truth, I transformed fear into power, confusion into clarity, and isolation into a sense of solidarity with those who had supported me throughout the process. This moment marked a turning point, a definitive decision to refuse silence and demand recognition for the harm that had been done. As the confrontation concluded, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, lingering anger, and cautious optimism. The act of speaking had stripped away the protective illusions of denial, leaving only the undeniable truth. The process of presenting evidence, asserting my experience, and witnessing the effects on my sister and family created a new dynamic in which accountability could no longer be ignored. The decision to confront, to speak boldly and strategically, had transformed the narrative from one of private suffering and familial dismissal into a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It was a critical step in the journey, a moment of moral courage that reshaped the trajectory of my recovery and set the stage for the consequences, vindication, and eventual transformation that would follow. In taking this step, I had crossed the point of no return, embracing the power of truth and the responsibility to ensure it was recognized, validated, and acted upon.
The confrontation had shifted the energy within our household in a way that was palpable and unrelenting. Hannah, once untouchable, now faced mounting pressure from every angle, and the carefully maintained illusions of innocence she had relied on began to crumble. For the first time, the consequences of her deliberate actions were immediate, visible, and inescapable. Friends who had quietly supported me stepped forward with renewed courage, corroborating the timeline of events and providing additional testimonies of Hannah's suspicious behavior leading up to and during prom. The Advocacy Center coordinated with law enforcement to ensure that these statements were properly documented and that the chain of evidence remained intact. The meticulous accumulation of facts, once a private exercise to regain control over my trauma, had now become a public demonstration of accountability. The mounting pressure on Hannah was not only legal, but social, as the web of truth surrounding her actions began to close in, leaving her with nowhere to hide. The sense of inevitability in the air was suffocating, yet empowering, reinforcing the reality that her carefully constructed defenses could no longer protect her from the consequences of her choices. The confrontation with Hannah had also created a ripple effect within the family. My parents, who had previously insisted on dismissing the incident, were forced to reckon with the undeniable reality that the betrayal was not hypothetical or exaggerated, but backed by concrete evidence and corroboration. Their discomfort was evident, a mixture of guilt, disbelief, and defensive rationalization. Yet even they could not deny the truth of what had been meticulously documented. Tensions escalated as family dynamics shifted, alliances realigned, and previously unspoken loyalties were tested. Every conversation became a delicate negotiation between truth and denial, with the mounting evidence acting as an unassailable foundation that compelled acknowledgement. The household, once a space of avoidance and quiet minimization, now became a crucible in which the moral and emotional implications of betrayal were being publicly confronted. This exposure intensified the pressure on Hannah while simultaneously fortifying my resolve to ensure that the consequences of her actions were not only recognized, but enforced. Amid the escalating confrontation, I found myself grappling with a new challenge: maintaining emotional equilibrium under intense scrutiny. The heightened visibility of the situation, coupled with Hannah's attempts to deflect or manipulate perception, created an environment of constant tension. Every interaction, whether with family members, friends, or authorities, required careful attention and strategic response. I had to anticipate potential distortions, preemptively reinforce the documented evidence, and remain composed while facing an antagonist skilled in evasion. This pressure was exhausting and emotionally taxing, yet it also reinforced my own resilience. The clarity of the truth, coupled with the systematic presentation of evidence, allowed me to navigate these encounters with confidence, asserting my narrative without succumbing to intimidation or manipulation. The experience honed my ability to remain grounded amidst chaos, transforming fear into strategic action and emotional turmoil into disciplined focus. The mounting pressure reached its peak during the formal meeting with law enforcement, advocates, and family representatives, where all parties were present to assess the validity of the evidence and determine the appropriate course of action. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. Hannah's previously unshakable confidence faltered under the scrutiny of objective review. The detailed hospital records, corroborating witness statements, and documented timeline of events left little room for plausible deniability. Every attempt to minimize or rationalize her actions was met with evidence that directly contradicted her narrative, reinforcing the objective reality of the betrayal.
The presence of neutral authorities provided a framework in which the truth could no longer be ignored or distorted. It was a moment in which the balance of power shifted decisively, with accountability becoming not only possible, but inevitable. The mounting pressure created an environment in which deception and deflection could no longer succeed, and the consequences of her actions were poised to unfold. As the session progressed, the psychological impact on Hannah became increasingly apparent. Her habitual strategies of charm, distraction, and minimization proved ineffective against the combination of objective proof and collective corroboration. Every attempt to evade responsibility was met with concrete evidence and authoritative inquiry, stripping away the defenses she had relied on for years. The mounting pressure highlighted the stark contrast between her manipulative tendencies and the unassailable truth of the documented events. In witnessing this, I experience a mixture of vindication and caution, recognizing that accountability was beginning to root truth, but that the situation was still delicate, requiring careful navigation to ensure that the process unfolded with integrity. The interplay between truth, pressure, and resistance underscored the necessity of methodical strategy, patience, and unwavering adherence to documented evidence. Beyond the immediate confrontation, the mounting pressure extended into the social realm. Friends, extended family members, and school administrators became aware, at least in part, of the incident and its verified consequences. The visibility of the situation created a network of accountability that Hannah could not evade. Rumors, previously vague or unverified, were replaced with documented facts, leaving a clear narrative in which responsibility was undeniable. This social dimension amplified the pressure as the implications of the betrayal extended beyond private family dynamics into the broader community. The combined weight of legal scrutiny, social visibility, and emotional confrontation created an environment in which accountability was unavoidable, forcing acknowledgement, fostering reflection, and setting the stage for consequences that could no longer be sidestepped. In this moment, the mounting pressure became both a shield and a catalyst, empowering me to continue asserting the truth while ensuring that the consequences of betrayal were fully recognized.
After weeks of mounting pressure, evidence gathering, and confrontation, I found myself navigating the dark night of the soul, a period in which the emotional and psychological toll of exposing the betrayal reached its peak. The initial relief I had felt from documenting proof and confronting my sister had been replaced by a deeper, more exhausting reality. The consequences of speaking out were heavier and more complicated than I had anticipated. Isolation weighed heavily on me, as my parents continued to struggle with denial and defensiveness, unable or unwilling to fully support my pursuit of justice. The once familiar comfort of family had shifted into a landscape fraught with tension, judgment, and discomfort, and I felt increasingly alone even as my advocates and friends provided support from outside the household. Every interaction with Hannah or our parents now carried the potential for conflict, evoking waves of anxiety and dread that left me physically tense and mentally fatigued. This was the stage in which the personal cost of seeking truth became starkly apparent. Standing up for justice was not merely a matter of documentation and confrontation, but also of enduring the ongoing emotional backlash and fractured relationships that followed. As the legal and social machinery began to move, the emotional consequences intensified. Hannah's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain appearances and shift blame created a constant environment of unpredictability. She would alternate between feigned innocence, subtle intimidation, and calculated charm, leaving me perpetually on edge and questioning how each encounter would unfold. Even small, routine interactions felt like minefields. Every family dinner, casual conversation, or chance encounter carried the weight of potential manipulation or gaslighting. The stress of anticipating these moments became a constant companion, sapping energy and making emotional equilibrium difficult to maintain. Despite my preparation and the growing strength derived from objective evidence, the psychological toll of remaining steadfast in the face of deliberate provocation was immense.
Every day became a test of resilience, forcing me to confront not only the betrayal itself, but also the residual emotional entanglement that had long bound me to my sister and family dynamics. In addition to the tension within the household, the consequences of speaking out rippled outward into my social environment. Friends, classmates, and peers began to respond to the revelations in varied ways, some with unequivocal support, others with distance, and still others with subtle judgment or curiosity. Navigating these responses added another layer of emotional complexity. While some offered empathy and validation, reinforcing the reality of the betrayal and the appropriateness of seeking accountability, others questioned the severity of the situation or expressed discomfort at the public unfolding of family conflict. Each interaction required careful emotional calibration, balancing honesty with self-protection and maintaining focus on the ultimate goal of accountability. The isolation I felt was magnified by the realization that even outside the immediate family, understanding and support were not guaranteed, and the emotional labor of managing these perceptions was exhausting. This stage forced me to confront the reality that seeking truth often comes with social cost, that justice is rarely clean or simple, and that resilience is forged in the crucible of sustained emotional challenge. The emotional intensity was compounded by moments of doubt and fear. Despite the undeniable proof, I sometimes questioned whether pursuing full accountability was worth the continued conflict and disruption. Nights were sleepless, filled with replaying events, imagining potential worst-case scenarios, and wrestling with the unpredictability of human reactions. The stress of anticipating these moments became a constant companion, sapping energy and making emotional equilibrium difficult to maintain. Despite my preparation and the growing strength derived from objective evidence, the psychological toll of remaining steadfast in the face of deliberate provocation was immense. Every day became a test of resilience, forcing me to confront not only the betrayal itself, but also the residual emotional entanglement that had long bound me to my sister and family dynamics. In navigating the consequences and backlash, I also became acutely aware of the need for self-care and emotional management. Advocates provided guidance on maintaining boundaries, processing trauma, and managing stress, emphasizing that resilience did not mean enduring everything silently, but rather finding ways to sustain strength while actively engaging with the situation. I implemented routines of reflection, journaling, and controlled exposure to stressful interactions, allowing myself to process the emotional fallout without becoming overwhelmed. This period of sustained intensity became, paradoxically, a form of empowerment. By confronting the full weight of the consequences, emotional, social, and familial, I was solidifying my capacity to stand firm in my truth and to maintain agency, even in the face of adversity. The darkness of this stage, though painful, was necessary. It sharpened my resolve, clarified my priorities, and prepared me for the eventual public and formal confrontation in which truth could finally be tested, verified, and publicly recognized. In this way, the dark night of the soul, though exhausting and painful, was not without purpose. It became the crucible in which resilience, clarity, and determination were forged, preparing me to endure the final stages of accountability with both courage and precision.
The culmination of weeks of emotional turmoil, mounting evidence, and painstaking preparation arrived with the formal confrontation, the point at which the truth was finally placed on trial. The setting was a neutral room arranged by the authorities and advocacy team, a space designed to balance fairness with accountability. The atmosphere was taut with tension, each person present acutely aware that the events to unfold would determine the immediate consequences and set the tone for future accountability. Hannah, once confident in her ability to manipulate perception, now faced an environment in which charm, deflection, or minimization would no longer suffice. Every piece of documented evidence, every witness statement, and every medical record would be scrutinized, forming a foundation upon which the narrative of betrayal could no longer be disputed. The energy in the room was intense, a mix of anticipation, unease, and moral gravity. And as I stepped forward to present my case, I felt the weight of every prior week of preparation and emotional struggle converge into this defining moment.
I began by systematically laying out the events of prom night, detailing the precise circumstances of my drink being drugged and the immediate physical and emotional consequences that followed. Each statement was supported by the hospital documentation, toxicology results, and corroborating observations from friends who had witnessed Hannah's suspicious behavior. The objective clarity of the evidence made any attempts to question the sequence of events futile. Every claim I made was anchored in verifiable fact. The process required focus and composure, as each word carried the weight of both personal experience and legal significance. The deliberate act of speaking the truth, fortified by tangible proof, transformed the confrontation into a demonstration of authority, moral clarity, and resilience. I realized that this was no longer just about exposing Hannah's betrayal, but also about asserting my own voice, validating my experience, and ensuring that the manipulation, deception, and harm inflicted could not be dismissed or minimized. As I continued, the response from the authorities and advocates reinforced the legitimacy and seriousness of my case. Every piece of evidence I presented was acknowledged, logged, and integrated into the formal review process, leaving no room for denial or distortion. Hannah's attempts to explain away her actions faltered under the weight of objective proof, her previously polished defenses rendered ineffective by the careful documentation that had been meticulously prepared. Witnesses who had supported me privately were now given the opportunity to testify or submit statements formally, their perspectives adding depth and credibility to the narrative. The systematic, evidence-based approach ensured that truth was prioritized over emotion, manipulation, or family bias. The room became a stage where accountability could no longer be ignored, and the interplay of documentation, witness corroboration, and structured confrontation created an unassailable framework in which the truth could be validated and enforced. The public nature of this confrontation, limited though it was, to family, authorities, and advocates, had an immediate impact on the dynamics of the situation. Hannah's demeanor shifted from defiance to visible unease, a stark contrast to the confidence she had previously displayed. Attempts to charm, deflect, or manipulate were met with factual counterpoints, leaving her responses increasingly fragmented and unconvincing. The weight of objective evidence, combined with the collective presence of witnesses and authorities, created an environment in which deception could no longer be sustained. For the first time, the consequences of her actions were unavoidable, immediate, and undeniable. This shift underscored the power of documentation, preparation, and strategic presentation in transforming a previously hidden betrayal into an accountable, recognized reality. It also reinforced my own sense of agency as I witnessed the tangible effects of presenting truth with clarity, confidence, and support. Throughout the process, I was acutely aware of the emotional stakes. Every memory of fear, confusion, and betrayal that had accompanied the night at prom resurfaced, yet it was tempered by the strength of preparation and the presence of supportive witnesses. The confrontation demanded a delicate balance of emotional authenticity and disciplined focus, allowing me to communicate the depth of the violation without succumbing to reactive anger or distress. This equilibrium was essential. It demonstrated credibility, reinforced the legitimacy of the evidence, and ensured that the narrative of betrayal remained the central focus. The emotional intensity, while challenging, became a tool for asserting presence, conviction, and the moral weight of my experience. It highlighted the interconnectedness of emotional resilience and strategic action, showing that truth, when paired with preparation and support, could withstand scrutiny and command recognition. By the conclusion of the confrontation, the room had transformed into a space where accountability could no longer be evaded. Authorities confirmed the validity of the evidence, witnesses' statements were formally recognized, and the trajectory of consequences was established. Hannah's attempts to minimize or deny were no longer tenable, and the clarity of the truth created a ripple effect across family and social circles. The confrontation was both the apex of emotional tension and the beginning of a process in which consequences would be enacted, relationships redefined, and recognition of wrongdoing solidified. For me, this stage represented the ultimate synthesis of preparation, courage, and strategic action. The act of bringing the truth into a formal, structured environment had transformed fear into empowerment, isolation into recognition, and betrayal into a platform for asserting agency, reclaiming control, and demanding justice. The aftermath of the formal confrontation brought a profound sense of resolution, not only in terms of accountability, but also in the tangible validation of my courage and perseverance. The authorities and advocates had confirmed that the documented evidence, combined with witness statements, was sufficient to substantiate the deliberate poisoning of my drink at prom, and the consequences for Hannah were now clearly outlined.
This recognition of wrongdoing brought with it an almost immediate shift in family dynamics. My parents, who had initially insisted I move on and brushed off my concerns, were now confronted with the undeniable reality of what had transpired. They were forced to reckon with both the severity of the incident and their own complicity in minimizing it. Their discomfort was palpable, a mixture of guilt, shame, and an implicit acknowledgement that avoidance and denial could no longer shield anyone from the consequences of deliberate harm. Witnessing the shift reinforced the power of truth when it is persistently documented, corroborated, and presented with clarity and authority. It became evident that accountability was not merely a legal or social mechanism, but a transformative force capable of restructuring relationships and redefining moral boundaries. Beyond family dynamics, the affirmation from the authorities and advocacy team validated the countless hours I had spent gathering evidence, documenting my experience, and preparing for confrontation. Every journal entry, every medical report, and every statement from friends who had observed the suspicious behavior at prom now carried formal weight, demonstrating that meticulous preparation and persistence could transform private suffering into public recognition of truth. This validation was deeply empowering, offering a counterbalance to the emotional exhaustion and isolation I had endured during the weeks leading up to the climax. It confirmed that my pursuit of justice was not only justified, but necessary and effective, underscoring the broader principle that truth, when pursued with diligence and strategic action, holds the power to transcend denial, manipulation, and avoidance. This awareness solidified a sense of personal agency that had been suppressed by trauma, fear, and familial resistance, reinforcing my capacity to navigate complex emotional and social landscapes with confidence and clarity. The consequences for Hannah extended beyond formal recognition and into the social and community spheres. Friends and peers, once unaware of the true nature of the prom incident, were now confronted with verifiable facts. The combination of objective evidence and public acknowledgement created a social accountability that she could not evade. Her attempts to maintain appearances or deflect responsibility were rendered ineffective by the structured and verifiable presentation of truth. The ripple effect of validation extended to those who had witnessed her behavior but had been hesitant to intervene, demonstrating the importance of corroboration and transparency in fostering justice. This social dimension of accountability reinforced the broader impact of my actions, showing that truth not only provides personal vindication, but also protects and empowers others who might be vulnerable to similar harm. The process transformed the incident from a private betrayal into a cautionary and instructive narrative for the community, amplifying the moral weight of documented truth. Emotionally, the aftermath was equally significant. The validation and recognition of my experience allowed for a gradual release of the accumulated tension, fear, and anxiety. The weeks of strategic preparation, confrontation, and endurance had taken a heavy toll, but now the burden of uncertainty and isolation began to lift. I experienced a profound sense of relief, not only because justice had been acknowledged, but also because the emotional labor invested in documenting, confronting, and asserting my truth was recognized as meaningful and effective. The shift from fear and uncertainty to empowerment and clarity was transformative, reshaping my perception of my own strength and resilience. It reinforced the notion that speaking truth, even in the face of intense personal cost, is a moral and strategic imperative capable of creating lasting change in both personal and social spheres. The resolution also prompted reflection on the broader implications of the experience. I recognized that the incident, though deeply painful, had illuminated critical lessons about vigilance,
self-advocacy, and the necessity of demanding accountability in environments where betrayal or harm might otherwise be minimized. The combination of personal courage, meticulous documentation, and strategic action had demonstrated that even in situations where family dynamics, social pressures, or systemic biases might initially obscure truth, persistence and preparation can ensure that wrongdoing is addressed. This realization carried a sense of empowerment that extended beyond the specific circumstances, offering a framework for responding to future challenges and for supporting others who might face similar betrayals. The process had not only established justice, but also cultivated resilience, strategic thinking, and moral clarity, tools that would serve as a foundation for future decisions and actions. As the immediate intensity of the confrontation subsided, a new equilibrium began to emerge. Relationships within the family were recalibrated, with acknowledgement of wrongdoing providing a basis for reassessing trust, boundaries, and accountability. Hannah, now fully exposed to the consequences of her actions, was compelled to confront her own behavior and its impact on those around her. Meanwhile, my position within the family and social network had shifted, reflecting both the courage to assert truth and the strategic acumen required to ensure it was recognized. The journey from betrayal to formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing demonstrated the transformative potential of truth, both in terms of individual empowerment and systemic accountability. The experience reinforced the principle that courage, persistence, and meticulous preparation are essential components of justice, and that validation of personal experience is a critical step in restoring agency, dignity, and moral clarity. The journey from betrayal to accountability reached its final stage with the transformation of my own life and perspective. In the weeks following the formal recognition of wrongdoing and the enforcement of consequences, I began to notice profound changes in both my internal state and the external world around me.
The burden of secrecy, fear, and suppression that had dominated my life since prom night gradually lifted, replaced by a sense of empowerment and clarity. Where once I had questioned my own judgment and struggled to assert my experience, I now recognized the strength and resilience that had been cultivated through months of documentation, confrontation, and strategic action. Every step, from the initial shock through the gathering of evidence to the climactic confrontation, had shaped me into someone who could navigate complex emotional and social dynamics with determination and moral clarity. The process had not only vindicated me in the eyes of authorities, family, and peers, but had also fostered a deep, personal understanding of my own capacity to endure, assert, and transform adversity into empowerment. As I rebuilt my sense of self, I also sought to reclaim spaces and activities that had been tainted by fear or trauma. Returning to social interactions, school events, and personal projects carried a newfound confidence that came not from naivety, but from experience. I understood that my voice mattered, that my actions could influence accountability, and that courage, combined with preparation and evidence, could affect meaningful change. This perspective allowed me to approach relationships, challenges, and opportunities with a clarity and assertiveness that had previously felt impossible. Where I had once felt silenced, marginalized, or dismissed, I now moved through the world with an intentional presence, grounded in the knowledge that truth, once revealed and supported, carries a transformative power that extends beyond immediate circumstances. Each interaction reinforced this awareness, solidifying both confidence and a sense of purpose that had been forged through hardship and advocacy. The impact of the experience also extended into my family dynamics. While the initial confrontation and subsequent acknowledgement of wrongdoing had been tense and emotionally charged, the long-term effect was a recalibration of trust, boundaries, and accountability. My parents, now fully aware of the deliberate harm and the necessity of recognition, began to adjust their expectations, support, and engagement in a manner that acknowledged both my autonomy and the moral gravity of the situation. Hannah, confronted with the consequences of her actions, was forced to navigate the repercussions with transparency and accountability. The shifts in family dynamics, though gradual and at times uncomfortable, reflected the broader principle that truth and consequence are essential to restructuring relationships built on deception or avoidance. These changes created an environment in which honesty, recognition, and moral responsibility became the foundation for moving forward, providing both closure and a framework for healthier interactions in the future. Beyond personal and familial transformation, the experience cultivated a deeper sense of purpose. Having navigated betrayal, systemic dismissal, and confrontation with courage and preparation, I recognized the potential to help others facing similar challenges. The process of gathering evidence, asserting truth, and demanding accountability illuminated not only the path to justice, but also the methods by which individuals can protect themselves and advocate for recognition in situations of betrayal or harm. This awareness inspired a commitment to support peers, friends, and community members who might face similar threats to their safety, autonomy, or dignity. By sharing the lessons learned about vigilance, preparation, strategic confrontation, and emotional resilience, I could transform personal trauma into a source of guidance and empowerment for others. The realization that suffering, when navigated with courage and clarity, can serve as both teacher and catalyst for broader impact, marked a profound evolution in my understanding of adversity and agency. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice the subtle ways in which empowerment permeated my daily life. Decisions that had once been clouded by fear or uncertainty became opportunities for assertiveness, reflection, and strategic action. Emotional resilience, developed during the darkest periods of confrontation and backlash, now served as a stabilizing force in navigating challenges, both expected and unforeseen. Relationships previously strained or distorted by deception were reassessed and recalibrated, guided by principles of transparency, trust, and accountability. The sense of self that emerged from this process was stronger, clearer, and more deeply rooted in the knowledge that courage, persistence, and strategic action are essential tools in confronting injustice. The transformative journey from victimhood to empowerment had not erased the trauma, but had reframed it as a foundation for resilience, moral clarity, and purposeful action. The symbolic representation of transformation manifested in multiple ways, from personal achievements to public recognition of advocacy and moral courage. I pursued activities that allowed me to channel resilience and assertiveness into constructive outlets, from academic and extracurricular endeavors to mentorship and peer support. Each accomplishment became a marker of the journey from betrayal and suppression to empowerment and purpose. The lessons learned through confrontation, documentation, and advocacy informed both personal growth and broader ethical awareness, highlighting the enduring importance of truth, accountability, and moral courage in shaping one's trajectory. The experience demonstrated that even in moments of profound vulnerability and injustice, strategic action, clarity of purpose, and unwavering commitment to truth can create a foundation for lasting transformation, guiding both individual and communal progress.
In the final reflection, the night at prom, once a symbol of betrayal and violation, became a pivotal point in my life's narrative, a catalyst for personal growth, resilience, and empowerment. Through perseverance, meticulous preparation, and unwavering dedication to truth, I transformed a deeply painful experience into a source of strength, insight, and moral authority. The journey underscored the power of truth to dismantle deception, restore agency, and foster meaningful change both within oneself and in the surrounding world. As I moved forward, the lessons of vigilance, courage, and accountability remained etched into my understanding of life, providing not only closure, but also a sense of purpose, clarity, and hope. The transformation was complete, from fear to empowerment, from betrayal to recognition, and from isolation to a life defined by agency, moral clarity, and the enduring impact of truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.